The auctioneer's gavel slammed down like a judge's verdict, silencing the murmurs in the dusty hall. Eli Carter, barely 20, stood on the creaking stage, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. No one in this small, suffocating Nebraska town would bid on him, not after they'd learned who he really was. The room smelled of stale beer and sweat, the kind of place where dreams went to die. Eli's hazel eyes darted across the crowd, searching for a single kind face among the sea of grimaces and whispers. He'd been outed a month ago, his secret spilled by a vengeful ex-friend. And now here he was, part of a cruel charity auction meant to raise funds for the town's failing church. The twist: it wasn't just labor they were bidding on, it was control. A twisted tradition where the highest bidder could own someone's time for a month. For Eli, it felt like selling his soul. He tugged at the frayed hem of his flannel shirt, his palms slick with sweat. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a sneer that could curdle milk, barked, "Come on, folks. This boy's strong enough for farm work. Errands. Whatever you need. Who'll start the bidding?" Silence. Not a single hand rose. Eli's cheeks burned as the crowd's eyes bored into him, their judgment heavier than the summer heat. $10. A voice called from the back. The room gasped, heads whipping toward the sound. Eli's breath caught as a stranger stepped forward, a man in his mid-20s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through the crowd's hypocrisy. "He's mine," the stranger said, his voice steady, daring anyone to challenge him. Caleb Monroe wasn't from around here. He'd rolled into town a week ago, a drifter with a beat-up truck and a past he didn't talk about. Something about Eli, his quiet strength, the way he stood tall despite the weight of the town's scorn, had stopped Caleb in his tracks. He didn't know why he'd come to this auction, but now he knew it was for Eli. The auctioneer hesitated, clearly thrown off by the bid. $10. Going once. No one countered. The gavel fell. Eli was Caleb's for a month. The crowd muttered, some with disgust, others with curiosity. Eli stepped off the stage, his legs shaky, and met Caleb's gaze. "Why?" Eli whispered, his voice barely audible. Caleb's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile. "Because no one deserves to be left behind." That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his cot in the church basement, where they auctioned, were housed until their service began. His mind raced. Who was Caleb? Why would a stranger risk the town's wrath for him? The memory of those blue eyes lingered, both comforting and unsettling. The next morning, Caleb showed up at the church, his truck idling outside. "Hop in," he said, leaning out the window. Eli hesitated, clutching his backpack. He'd heard the rumors about Caleb. Some said he was a runaway, others a con man. But there was no malice in his voice, only a quiet confidence that made Eli's chest ache with something unfamiliar: hope. They drove to a small farm just outside town, a place Caleb had rented temporarily. It was run down, with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but it felt alive with possibility. "You're not my servant," Caleb said as they walked through the overgrown fields. "I bid on you to get you out of that hellhole. But if you're going to stay, you'll work with me, not for me." Eli nodded, unsure how to process this. Work with Caleb meant freedom, But it also meant proximity close enough to notice the way Caleb's hands moved with purpose. The way his laugh broke through the silence like sunlight. Eli had spent so long hiding who he was, terrified of his own heart, that Caleb's openness felt like a lifeline and a trap all at once. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. They repaired fences, cleared brush, and shared quiet meals on the porch. Caleb didn't push Eli to talk, but his presence was a constant invitation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Eli found himself staring at Caleb's profile. "Why are you so kind to me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Caleb turned, his expression soft but guarded. "I've been where you are, Eli. Hated for who I am. I got out, and I swore I'd never let someone else drown in that kind of loneliness." Eli's throat tightened. He wanted to ask more, to know Caleb's story, but the weight of his own secrets held him back. Instead, he whispered, "Thank you." But the town wasn't done with them. Whispers spread like wildfire about Caleb's mysterious past, about Eli's sinful nature. One night, as they sat by a campfire, a rock sailed through the darkness, shattering a window on Caleb's truck. A note was tied to it: "Fags don't belong here." Eli froze, his heart sinking. Caleb's jaw clenched, but he didn't flinch. "They're scared," he said, tossing the note into the fire. "Scared of what they don't understand." "They'll come for us," Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. Caleb met his eyes, unflinching. "Let them try." The days that followed were a tightrope walk between fear and defiance. Eli and Caleb worked side by side, their bond growing in the quiet moments, shared glances over coffee, the brush of hands while passing tools. But the town's hostility was a shadow that never lifted. Tires slashed in the night, cruel notes left on the porch, and glares from neighbors became their new normal. Eli tried to stay strong, but the weight of it all pressed down on him. He'd spent his life in this town, always the odd one out, always hiding. Being outed had stripped away his armor, and now every hateful word felt like a blade. Caleb, though, was different. He carried himself with a quiet rebellion, like he'd fought bigger battles than this town could ever muster. One afternoon, while they were fixing a broken gate, Eli finally asked, "Where'd you come from, Caleb? Why'd you end up here?" Caleb paused, wiping sweat from his brow. His blue eyes flickered with something raw, something he'd buried deep. "Grew up in a place like this," he said. "Small town. Big prejudices. My folks, they didn't take it well when I came out. Kicked me out at 17. Been moving ever since. Trying to find somewhere I can breathe." Eli's heart ached. He wanted to reach out, to touch Caleb's arm, but fear held him back. "Do you ever stop running?" he asked. Caleb's gaze softened. "Maybe I'm not running anymore." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Eli felt his cheeks flush, and he turned away, pretending to focus on the gate. But his mind was racing. Caleb wasn't just a savior, was someone who understood, someone who'd walked through the same fire. That night, they sat on the porch, the air thick with the scent of rain. Caleb pulled out a battered guitar and strummed a soft melody, his voice low and warm as he sang about freedom and loss. Eli listened, captivated, feeling the music wrap around him like a blanket. When Caleb finished, he set the guitar down and looked at Eli. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Eli swallowed hard. "All the time. But I'm scared. This is all I know." "You're braver than you think," Caleb said. "You're still here, standing tall, even after everything." Eli's eyes stung with unshed tears. No one had ever called him brave before. He wanted to believe it. But the town's hatred was a constant reminder of how small he felt. The next day, trouble found them. A group of men from Townline by Tommy, the ex-friend who'd outed Eli, showed up at the farm. Tommy was a hulking figure, all muscle and menace, his face twisted with disgust. "You two think you can just flaunt your sin here?" he spat. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself between Eli and the group. "This is private property. Leave." Tommy sneered. "Or what? You gonna fight us all, Drifter?" Eli's stomach churned, but Caleb didn't back down. "I don't want to fight, but I'm not letting you touch him." The tension snapped like a taut wire. Tommy lunged, and Caleb met him with a swift dodge and a punch that sent Tommy staggering. The other men hesitated, clearly unprepared for Caleb's strength. "Get out," Caleb growled, his voice low and dangerous. They retreated, muttering threats. But Eli knew this wasn't over. As they drove off, he turned to Caleb, his voice shaking. "You didn't have to do that." Caleb's expression softened. "Yeah, I did." That night, Eli couldn't shake the image of Caleb standing up for him. It stirred something deep inside, something he'd tried to bury for years. He was falling for Caleb, and it terrified him. Love, in a place like this, felt like a death sentence. But Caleb was undeterred. The next morning, he handed Eli a hammer and a grin. "Let's keep building this place. Show him we're not going anywhere." Eli nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of fear and determination. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone. But the town's anger was growing, and he knew they were running out of time. The farm became their sanctuary, a fragile bubble in a world that wanted to crush them. Eli and Caleb worked tirelessly, turning the rundown property into something alive, newly painted fences, a garden starting to bloom. But every night, Eli lay awake, waiting for the next attack. The town's hatred was a storm gathering on the horizon, and he could feel its weight in his bones. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb opened up more than usual. "I had someone. Once," he said, staring into the flames. "Back in Oklahoma. His name was Jamie. We thought we could make it work. But the town broke us. He stayed. I left." Eli's heart twisted. "Do you miss him?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Every day. But I learned something. You can't let fear win. Not when it comes to who you are." Eli wanted to ask more, but the vulnerability in Caleb's voice stopped him. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing Caleb's. It was a small gesture, but it felt like crossing a chasm. Caleb didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand, lacing their fingers together. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through Eli, and for a moment, the world felt right. But the world wasn't kind. The next day, the sheriff showed up. A grim man named Hargrove who'd known Eli since he was a kid. "Folks are talking," Hargrove said, his eyes flicking between Eli and Caleb. "Saying you two are causing trouble. I don't care who you are, but you're stirring up a hornet's nest." Caleb crossed his arms. "We're just living. Sheriff. That a crime now?" Hargrove's expression hardened. "Watch yourself, son. This town doesn't take kindly to your kind." Eli's stomach dropped. He'd always respected Hargrove. But now he saw the truth. Even the good people here were complicit in the town's cruelty. After the sheriff left, Caleb turned to Eli. "We need a plan. They're not going to stop." Eli nodded. "But fear not at him. What if we can't fight them?" Caleb's eyes burned with determination. "Then we outlast them." Over the next few days, they fortified the farm locking gates, securing windows, and setting up motion lights. But the real battle was in Eli's heart. Every touch, every shared smile with Caleb made him want to believe in a future where they could be together. Yet the town's hatred was a constant reminder of how fragile that dream was. One night, as they sat on the porch, Caleb pulled Eli close. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. Eli's breath hitched, and before he could stop himself, he leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like defiance and salvation all at once. It was soft, tentative, but it carried the weight of everything they'd been through. When they pulled apart, Eli's eyes were wet. "I'm scared, Caleb." "I know," Caleb said, brushing a thumb across Eli's cheek. "But we're in this together." The moment was shattered by the sound of engines roaring in the distance. Headlights pierced the darkness, and Eli's heart sank. Tommy and his crew were back, and this time, they weren't alone. The trucks screeched to a halt, their headlights blinding. Eli's pulse raced as he and Caleb stood on the porch, facing the mob. Tommy stepped out, flanked by 6 others, their faces twisted with rage. In the flickering light, Eli saw crowbars and baseball bats. This wasn't just intimidation, it was a promise of violence. "Get inside," Caleb said, his voice low but firm. Eli shook his head. "I'm not leaving you." Caleb's eyes softened for a moment before hardening again. "Stay behind me." Tommy sauntered forward, his bat tapping against his palm. "You freaks think you can just live here like it's normal. This town doesn't want you." Caleb stepped forward, unflinching. "This is our home. You don't get to decide who belongs." Tommy laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the night. "You're gonna regret this, Drifter." Before anyone could move, a new voice cut through the tension. "Enough." It was Mrs. Larson, the elderly librarian who'd always been kind to Eli. She stepped out of the shadows, her frail frame trembling but her voice steady. "Tommy, you and your boys need to leave. This isn't who we are." The mob hesitated, surprised by her presence. Tommy sneered. "Stay out of this, old lady." But Mrs. Larson didn't back down. "I've watched this town tear itself apart over hate for too long. Eli's a good kid, and this man's done nothing but help him. You're the ones who should be ashamed." Her words hung in the air. And for a moment, the mob's resolve wavered. But Tommy wasn't swayed. He raised his bat, and Caleb tensed, ready to fight. Then, headlights flashed again, not from the mob, but from another car pulling up. It was Sheriff Hargrove, his siren blaring briefly. He stepped out, his face grim. "Tommy, stand down. You're on private property, and I'm not going to let this turn into a riot." Tommy's face twisted with fury, but he knew better than to challenge the sheriff. With a final glare at Eli and Caleb, he signaled his crew to leave. As the trucks roared off, Eli's knees buckled, and Caleb caught him, pulling him close. "Mrs. Larson approached, her eyes kind but tired. "I'm sorry it's come to this, Eli. But you're not alone. There are folks in this town who see you for who you are." Eli nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. After Hargrove and Mrs. Larson left, Caleb led Eli inside. They sat on the couch, Eli's head resting on Caleb's shoulder. "I thought we were done for," Eli admitted. Caleb's arm tightened around him. "We're stronger than they think." But the victory was bittersweet. The town was divided, and the hatred was far from gone. Over the next few days, Eli and Caleb kept a low profile, but the tension was suffocating. Eli began to wonder if staying was worth it, if love could survive in a place so determined to destroy it. One afternoon, while they were planting new seeds in the garden, Caleb turned to Eli. "If we leave, we could start over somewhere new. Somewhere we don't have to fight every day." Eli's heart ached at the thought. Leaving meant giving up everything he'd known, but staying meant risking everything they'd built. "I don't know if I'm ready," he said. Caleb nodded, his expression gentle. "Whatever you choose, I'm with you." That night, as they lay in bed, Eli traced the lines of Caleb's face, memorizing every detail. For the first time, he let himself believe that love could be enough. But the sound of shattering glass in the night jolted them awake, and Eli knew the fight was far from over. The broken window was just the beginning. The next morning, Eli and Caleb found their garden trampled, the new plants ripped from the earth. Spray painted across the barn was a single word: leave. Eli's chest tightened, the air feeling too thin to breathe. Caleb's face was a storm of anger and resolve. "We're not running," he said, grabbing a bucket of paint to cover the graffiti. "This is our home." But Eli wasn't so sure anymore. The town's hatred was relentless, and he couldn't shake the fear that it would destroy them. "What if they hurt you?" he asked, his voice breaking. Caleb paused, his brush dripping paint. "They can try, but I'm not letting them take you from me." Eli wanted to believe him, but the weight of the town's scorn was crushing. He thought of his mother, who died when he was young, and how she'd always told him to be kind, even when the world wasn't. He wondered what she'd think of him now, standing up to a town that hated him for who he loved. That afternoon, Mrs. Larson stopped by with a basket of food. "Some folks are organizing," she said. "They're tired of the hate. There's a meeting tonight at the library. You should come." Eli hesitated, but Caleb nodded. "We'll be there." The library was a small, Warm space filled with the scent of old books. About a dozen people showed up, Mrs. Larson, a few shopkeepers, a teacher, and even the pastor's wife, Mrs. Daniels. They spoke quietly, their voices laced with guilt and determination. "We've let this go on too long," Mrs. Daniels said. "Eli, you've always been one of us. We're sorry it took us so long to stand up." Eli's throat tightened. He'd spent so long feeling invisible. And now these people were seeing him, really seeing him. Caleb squeezed his hand under the table, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone. But the meeting wasn't without tension. Some argued that standing up to Tommy and his crew would only make things worse. "They're dangerous," a shopkeeper said. "We need to be careful." Caleb leaned forward, his voice steady. "Careful doesn't mean silent. If we don't stand up now, they'll think they've won." The room fell quiet, and Eli felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could change things. But as they left the library, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Tommy. Alone this time, his face a mask of rage. "You think you can turn this town against us?" he spat. Caleb stepped in front of Eli. "We're not turning anyone against you. You're doing that yourself." Tommy's fist clenched, but he didn't swing. Instead, he leaned in close, his voice low. "This isn't over." As he walked away, Eli's heart pounded. "He's not going to stop," he said. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then we'll be ready." Over the next few days, the town began to shift. More people spoke out, leaving notes of support on the farm's gate or stopping by to offer help. But Tommy's crew wasn't done. One night, they set fire to a shed on the property. The flames lit up the sky, and Eli watched, helpless, as Caleb fought to put it out. When the fire was finally out, Caleb turned to Eli, his face smudged with soot. "We can rebuild," he said. "We always will." Eli nodded. But inside, he was breaking. How much more could they take? The fire left scars on the land, on Eli's heart. He and Caleb worked to salvage what they could. But the destruction felt like a warning they couldn't ignore. The town was splitting in two, those who supported them, and those who wanted them gone. Eli felt the weight of every choice, every glance from Caleb that made his heart race. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Eli finally spoke his fear aloud. "What if we're fighting for something we can't win?" Caleb's eyes met his, steady and sure. "We're not fighting for the town, Eli. We're fighting for us." Those words lit something inside Eli, a fire brighter than the one that had burned their shed. He leaned in, kissing Caleb with a fierceness he didn't know he had. It was a promise, a vow to keep going, no matter what. But the town wasn't done testing them. The next day, Sheriff Hargrove returned with news. "Tommy's been stirring up trouble," he said. "He's planning something big. I can't prove it yet, but you need to be ready." Caleb nodded, his expression grim. "We will be." They spent the next few days preparing. They installed cameras, reinforced the fences, and kept a bat by the door. Eli hated how it felt like they were gearing up for war. But Caleb's strength kept him grounded. "We're not alone anymore," Caleb reminded him. pointing to the growing number of supporters who stopped by with supplies or kind words. One of those supporters was Jamie, Caleb's ex from Oklahoma. He showed up unannounced, a lean man with tired eyes and a hesitant smile. "I heard about what's happening," he said. "I couldn't stay away." Eli felt a pang of jealousy, but Caleb's hand on his shoulder steadied him. "Jamie's a friend," Caleb said later. "He's here to help, not to complicate things." Jamie proved his worth, helping with repairs and sharing stories of his own battles with small-town prejudice. His presence was a reminder that they weren't the only ones who'd faced this fight. But it also brought tension. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb's past was closer than he wanted it to be. One night, as they sat around a fire with Jamie, the sound of engines roared again. This time, it wasn't just Tommy's crew, it was a dozen men, armed with more than bats. They stormed the farm, shouting slurs and smashing anything in their path. Caleb grabbed the bat. Jamie picked up a shovel, and Eli stood frozen, his heart pounding. "Stay back," Caleb shouted, swinging the bat as Tommy advanced. The fight was chaos, fists flying, shouts echoing in the night. Eli snapped out of his fear, grabbing a piece of wood and joining the fray. He wasn't weak anymore. He wasn't invisible. Sheriff Hargrove arrived just in time, his deputies pulling the mob apart. Tommy and his crew were arrested, but not before they'd done damage: broken windows, a smashed door, and bruises on all three of them. As the sirens faded, Eli collapsed into Caleb's arms, sobbing. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered. Caleb held him tight. "You don't have to, but we can." The arrests didn't end the fight, but they shifted it. The town was forced to confront itself. News of the attack spread, and more people began to speak out against the hate. Mrs. Larson organized a community meeting at the church, and to Eli's surprise, it was packed not just with supporters, but with people who'd stayed silent for too long. Eli stood at the front, Caleb by his side, and spoke for the first time in public. "I've lived here my whole life," he said, his voice shaking but strong. "I've never hurt anyone. All I want is to live, to love, like anyone else. Why is that so wrong?" The room was silent. Then Mrs. Daniels stood. "It's not wrong," she said. "We've been wrong to let this hate fester." One by one, others stood, sharing stories of their own struggles or apologizing for their silence. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Some walked out, unwilling to change, but it was a start. Eli felt a weight lift, even as he knew the road ahead would be hard. Caleb and Eli spent the next few days rebuilding, with help from Jamie and others. The farm began to feel like a home again. But Eli couldn't shake the question that had haunted him since Caleb's offer to leave. Could they stay in a place that had tried to break them? One evening, as they walked through the fields, Caleb stopped. "I love you, Eli," he said, his voice raw. "Wherever we go, whatever we do, I wanted to be with you." Eli's breath caught. He'd never heard those words before. Not like this. "I love you too," he whispered. And for the first time, he felt the truth of it in his bones. They kissed under the stars, the world quiet for once. But the peace was fleeting. Tommy was out on bail, and rumors swirled that he was planning one final act of revenge. Eli and Caleb knew they had to be ready. But now they had something stronger than fear, each other. The final showdown came on a quiet Sunday morning. Eli and Caleb were in the garden when they heard the roar of engines. Tommy and his remaining loyalists, fewer now, but still dangerous, pulled up, their faces set with grim determination. This time, they weren't just here to intimidate. Caleb grabbed the bat, but Eli stopped him. "We can't keep fighting like this," he said. "Let me try something." Before Caleb could protest, Eli stepped forward, his heart pounding, but his resolve unshaken. "Tommy," he called, his voice steady. "This has to stop. You're tearing this town apart. And for what? Because I love someone you don't approve of." Tommy's face twisted, but Eli kept going. "I'm not leaving. This is my home. And I'm not ashamed of who I am anymore." The crowd behind Tommy shifted, some looking uneasy. Then, Mrs. Larson appeared, followed by Mrs. Daniels, Jamie, and a dozen others from the community meeting. They stood behind Eli and Caleb, a silent wall of support. Tommy's resolve cracked. He looked at the crowd, then at Eli, and for the first time, he seemed to see the boy he'd known since childhood. "You're not worth this," he muttered, but there was no venom in his voice. He turned and walked away, his crew following. The town didn't change overnight, but that moment marked a turning point. Eli and Caleb stayed, rebuilding their farm and their lives. They faced challenges, whispers, glares, the occasional act of vandalism, but they also found allies. People who saw them for who they were, two young men in love, fighting for their place in the world. Years later, the farm was thriving, a symbol of resilience. Eli and Caleb married in a small ceremony, surrounded by those who'd stood by them. Mrs. Larson gave a toast, her voice trembling with pride. "You showed us what courage looks like," she said. As they stood together, hands entwined, Eli looked at Caleb and knew they'd made it. They hadn't just survived, they'd built a life worth fighting for. The town would never be perfect, but it was home, and they'd carved out a space where love could grow.